The laughter came sharp and heavy, slicing through the warm hum of conversation like a knife through glass. It wasn't the soft kind that belonged to joy or friendship. No, this was the kind of laughter that had teeth, the kind that was meant to wound. Naomi felt it before she heard it, like a tremor through the floor beneath her feet. She stood at the back counter of the Copper Ivy. Her head bent slightly as her hands sorted through a small pile of crumpled bills and loose coins. Her fingertips were sore from hours of carrying trays, her shoes pinched, her legs ached. The restaurant was glowing gold chandeliers, velvet booths, rich men's laughter filling the air, but in the middle of it all, she was invisible. That's when he walked in, Charles Vance. His reputation arrived first: money, arrogance, the kind of power that dripped from his cufflinks. The man wore wealth like armor. His friends followed behind him, loud, laughing, their cologne thick enough to choke the air. The maitre d' practically bowed as he led them to their table. Naomi didn't look up at first. She'd seen men like that before, men who believed the world existed to orbit around their comfort. But she felt his gaze land on her anyway, the kind of stare that wasn't admiration, it was ownership. Charles leaned back in his chair, the gold of his watch catching the light as he sipped his drink, and then he saw at her small pile of tips, a few ones, a 5, some coins. He grinned. "Careful," he called out, voice loud enough to reach the far end of the room. "Don't lose count, sweetheart. That's your rent money, right?" The words hit like a slap. The laughter that followed echoed through every corner of the restaurant. Even the waiters froze, eyes darting away. Unwilling to share the humiliation, Naomi stood there, motionless for a second, the sound ringing in her ears. Then she did something that took every ounce of strength she had left. She smiled. Just a small, polite smile, the kind she had practiced 1,000 times before. "Enjoy your meal, sir," she said, her tone steady, her voice soft. She turned away before the tears could betray her. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept moving, tray in hand, eyes forward. The smell of roasted garlic and wine hung in the air, but all she could taste was bitterness. Her heart pounded, not from anger, but from the effort it took to hold her dignity in place. She moved between tables like a ghost, unseen, unheard, carrying plates to people who barely looked at her. In the corner, the bartender, a kind man named Luis, watched her quietly. When she passed by, he whispered, "Ignore them, Naomi. They don't know who you are." She didn't respond, not because she didn't hear him, but because she couldn't trust her voice not to break. She walked back to the staff hallway, set her tray down, and took a slow breath. In that breath, the noise of the restaurant faded. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the piano music, all of it dimmed until it was just her heartbeat and her own thoughts. She looked down at her hands, still trembling, still red from work. In those palms, calloused and tired, she saw her entire life. Every struggle, every time she'd been underestimated, every moment she'd been made to feel small. But tonight, something changed. Something inside her hardened, not into anger, but into resolve. Charles's voice floated through the dining room again, booming, charming, commanding. He was talking about investments, about how money makes the world move. His friends nodded like disciples at a sermon. Naomi walked past them again, placing a bottle of champagne on their table. The same man who mocked her barely looked at her now. That was the irony of power. It demanded attention, but gave none in return. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Her uniform was spotless, her hair pulled tight, her face calm, but her eyes told a different story. There was something burning there. Not hatred, something sharper. Purpose. The shift dragged on. The hours blurred together until the last guests began to leave. Charles and his friends stayed late, laughing too loud, tipping too little. Naomi cleared their table after they were gone. Empty glasses, half-eaten steak, and a folded napkin with a single 20 under it, $20. The same man who spent more on a bottle of wine than she made in a week thought that was enough. She looked at the bill, then at the seat where he'd sat, and whispered under her breath, "One day, you'll see me again." The manager flicked off the lights one by one, leaving only the soft glow of the bar behind. Naomi sat for a moment, her apron in her lap, counting her money again. It wasn't much, $58 and some change, but to her, it was more than money, it was progress. Every bill was a brick in a foundation she was quietly building. Every tip, Every extra shift, every late night she was buying her freedom $1 at a time. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Naomi stepped into the cold air, her breath visible, her reflection faint in the restaurant's glass doors. Behind her, the copper ivy glittered like a palace, untouchable, but she wasn't looking at it anymore. She was looking past it toward the future she'd already begun to claim. She walked to the bus stop, clutching her worn notebook to her chest. Inside it were scribbles, dreams, numbers, plans for her cafe. Her cafe, the one she'd open someday. She smiled faintly at the thought. She could already see it. Sunlight spilling through large windows, the smell of fresh coffee, laughter that healed instead of humiliated. A car drove by, splashing water across her shoes. She laughed quietly to herself. Figures, she whispered. But even then, the laughter didn't sting like before. It fueled her. As the bus arrived, she climbed aboard and looked out the window. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold. Somewhere back there, Charles was still laughing, still believing he was untouchable. But Naomi knew something he didn't, that arrogance blinds, but humility builds. And though she didn't know when or how, she felt it deep in her bones. The next time he saw her, the world would be different. The power would shift, the laughter would stop. Because sometimes, the quietest ones in the room are the ones planning the loudest comeback. Every night she went to the same corner, the shadowed slice of wall by the service station where the soft light from the bar met the hum of the dining room. Naomi would lean her hip against the counter and count her tips like a prayer. Coins, singles, tens when the night was kind. She stacked them slow so she could feel the weight. Every bill was a step, every coin was a breath. She knew the sound of money that came from kindness and the sound of money tossed like crumbs. She took both with the same steady hands because both moved her forward. The other servers talked when they thought she couldn't hear. "She's too quiet," one said. "Too proud," said another. "Too hopeful," someone laughed, like hope was a bad habit. Naomi kept her eyes on the stack. She let their words float past like steam from a plate. She had learned the trick years ago. Don't fight the noise. Outlast it. She wrote each night's total in a small notebook with a tear on the cover. She added numbers in the corner of the page, tiny rows that only she could read. Rent, food, bus pass, savings, dream. That last line was her favorite. She'd circle it twice and draw a little box next to it, like a promise she would one day check. A cafe with long windows and a bell on the door. Coffee that tasted like warmth. Chairs that didn't judge who sat in them. A place where kindness mattered more than credit cards. But power liked to walk loud. And Charles Vance came often. He came with new clients and old friends, and a laugh that pushed the room to listen. He would throw his coat over a chair and slap a palm on the table like he owned the wood. "To another win," he'd say, lifting a glass, and the men around him would raise theirs because that was the script. He noticed everything that made him feel big and nothing that made him small. Naomi moved around him like weather, steady and necessary, invisible to men who believed light bent for them. One night he waved his black card at her and grinned like a boy who'd stolen something and wanted the world to clap. "You should be grateful," he said, almost sweet, almost kind, and that made it worse. "People like me keep places like this alive." He winked, as if he'd given her a gift. Naomi's smile never cracked. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. Her voice was a smooth line drawn through the mess. She poured his wine and walked away with a calm that looked like peace but felt like iron. After the shift, when the chairs stood on tables and the floor smelled like lemon and bleach, Naomi sat on a milk crate in the back and opened her notebook. She wrote the date, wrote the total, drew the little box, circled the dream. She added a phone number for a roaster she'd found online. She wrote the names of 2 used espresso machines. She watched videos on her cracked phone about cost of goods and profit margins. Words like equity and overhead made her head hurt, but she wrote them anyway and made them soft with her own notes. A stranger in a video told her, "Start small. Start now." She pressed pause and whispered, "Okay." She saved the clip to watch again tomorrow. She turned off the light and let the room go dark around her, then walked home under a sky that didn't care who owned what as long as the stars were seen. The nights blurred into a rhythm. Set the tables. Take the orders. Carry the plates. Smile through the noise. Count the money. Write the plan. The city breathed in gold and steel outside the windows, but inside the copper ivy, the air was velvet heavy, like a hand on a throat that swore it was only a hug. Naomi learned the steps of that dance. She learned which guests tipped because they saw her and which guests tipped because they saw themselves. She learned that wealth can be warm when it wants to be and sharp when it chooses. She learned that both kinds cut, and both kinds healed, depending on how you hold them. Then came the night the room snapped. It was a Friday, dressed like a holiday. The chandelier threw diamonds across the walls. The piano sang a song that sounded like silk. The door opened and Charles floated in like a ship with its own weather. 2 clients slid behind him, men with big watches and nervous smiles. The maitre d' ushered them to the round table near the window, the one that made people feel like the city was their living room. The first bottle popped like a starter pistol. Charles leaned back and told a story about a deal that had broken another man's back. The clients laughed because they were supposed to. Naomi brought bread, water, a smile that didn't belong to him. The seconds stacked into minutes and the wine stacked into a wall he could hide behind. Halfway through the second course, he waved hard and spilled a crimson arc across the linen. The stain spread like a slow bruise. He snapped his fingers without looking at her. "Clean it, sweetheart." The word was bright and empty, a sugar-coated command. Naomi reached for a cloth. She knelt because the stain had run like a river to the edge. Her knee touched the marble. Cold, hard, honest. She blotted the red like she was erasing a story. The table fell quiet just long enough for a whisper to carry. One of the clients leaned toward Charles with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Imagine her owning a place like this," he said, like a joke he only half believed. Charles laughed, full and careless. "She can barely afford a cab ride home." The laugh bounced off the glass and came back meaner. A couple at the next table looked down at their forks. The bartender wiped the same spot twice. The manager pretended to study the floor plan like it had changed. Naomi kept her eyes on the stain. "Slow blot, fold the cloth." Slow blot again. She heard the sentence land on her shoulders and slide down her spine, but it did not sink in, not this time. She had 1,000 small hurts behind her. This one would not be the one that stayed. She stood, folded the cloth again, and met Charles's eyes. Her face held no heat, no plea, only weathered calm. He blinked as if surprised she had a face at all. "Anything else?" she asked. The words were gentle but steady. A plate could balance on them. Charles smirked because men like him collect smirks the way others collect stamps. "Yes," he said. "Another bottle. The good one." He turned to the client beside him. "Watch this. She'll carry it like it's gold." He laughed again. The laugh tried to be charming. It failed. Naomi walked away. In the mirror behind the bar she saw her own back, straight as a line. Louise slid the requested bottle toward her. "You okay?" he asked without looking up. She nodded. "I'm fine." He touched the neck of the bottle and lowered his voice. "You don't have to be." She tucked that kindness into the pocket where she kept her pen. She poured at the table with a hand that did not shake, a wrist that did not bend to please. Charles watched her like she was a trick. "Careful," he said. "That's more than your tips." The client beside him shifted, a flicker of shame crossing his face. Naomi capped the bottle and set it down with a soft click. "Anything else?" she asked again. Her voice stayed level, her eyes did not. Between tables, the dining room hummed. But beneath that hum, something else began to rise. It was small at first, like the lift of wind before rain. She could feel it in her ribs, a low drum that said, "Enough," not rage, not revenge. Something cleaner, a refusal that did not need to be loud to be real. She imagined her cafe's door and the bell above it. She imagined her mother at a corner table, smiling at the walls Naomi had built. She imagined a girl walking in after a long day, the way she would hand that girl a cup and a seat and a smile that told the truth. "You belong here." The manager stepped near, whispering her name like a warning. "He's our best spender," he said. "Keep him happy." She turned to him slowly. "I am keeping him served," she said. "Happiness is extra." The manager opened his mouth, then closed it like a door he did not own. He stepped back. The drum in Naomi's chest got louder. At closing, Charles lingered. The men with him checked their watches and left with quick handshakes and eyes that wouldn't settle. He stayed and swirled the last red ring at the bottom of his glass. When Naomi came to clear the table, he put the glass down and looked up at her like he had finally decided to see. "What's your name again?" he asked, as if he had never heard it. She set the tray down. Naomi, she said. He rolled the name in his mouth like a coin to test if it was real. Naomi, he repeated, slow, a little thick. Right, Naomi. Do you know how many places would beg for my business? He leaned forward. This city runs on men like me. He smiled as if he had offered a blessing. Naomi held his gaze. The noise of the room fell away until there were only 2 breaths. His, heavy with wine and pride, hers, steady with work and will. She slid the check onto the table and placed a pen on top. The city also runs on women like me, she said. No heat, no edge, just fact. He stared at her, confused by a world that did not wobble at his touch. He signed without reading. He stood and brushed past her, the scent of his cologne fading like a promise that never lands. When the door swung shut behind him, the night air slipped in and cooled her skin. She went to her corner and counted. Coins, singles, tens, her lifeline. She wrote the number in her notebook, drew the box, circled the dream. She added a new line under the totals. Find a broker. Ask about small business leases. She stared at the words until they stopped looking like a dare and started looking like a plan. She closed the book and held it to her chest the way some people hold faith. Out on the street, a cab splashed through a puddle and threw water across the curb. She didn't step back. She let the droplets hit her shoes and dry. She lifted her chin and looked at the glow in the windows like it was a mirror she could walk through when she chose. Then she turned toward the bus stop, toward the night that always made room for her, and felt the drum in her chest settle into a beat she could build on. Behind her, the chandelier dimmed. Ahead of her, a door she hadn't found yet swung once in the wind, then stilled, as if waiting for her hand. The sign over the door no longer whispered someone else's name. It didn't bow to old money or old habits. It glowed in warm gold letters that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back into the street like a promise kept. Naomi's table. People paused on the sidewalk just to read it twice. Some smiled without knowing why. Inside, the air felt different from the room it used to be. The velvet heaviness was gone. The hush that used to cover the poor and raise the rich had lifted. In its place was light, soft, and honest. Glass jars of beans lined the back wall. Plants leaned toward the windows like they, too, wanted to see what hope looked like in daylight. The cups were thick and warm in the hand. The music was low and kind. And behind the counter, where once she had counted small money under big laughter, Naomi stood tall in a black blazer that fit like it was made for her future and not her fear. Her staff moved with quiet grace. A young barista named Reina pulled shots like a violinist plays notes steady, sure, listening for truth in the sound. Luis, who had left the bar at the Copper Ivy months earlier, now balanced plates with a smile that reached people where it mattered. Naomi watched it all with a calm that didn't need to announce itself. She drifted from table to table, checking on strangers who already felt like regulars. There were students with open laptops, older couples sharing one muffin and 2 memories, a nurse with tired eyes finally sitting down. No one rushed anyone here. That was the rule she had written in her bones long before it hung in the back office. Kindness first, always. People didn't come for chandeliers anymore. They came for the way Naomi remembered their names, the way the room seemed to lean toward them instead of away. The way a hot cup placed gently on a table could say, "I see you." Business bloomed because respect had roots. Word of mouth traveled faster than any ad. A blogger wrote that the light at Naomi's table felt like morning even in late afternoon. A teacher said this was where she graded papers because the coffee tasted like patience. A delivery driver tipped double because someone finally asked how his day was and did not look past the answer. Naomi kept her old notebook in the office, the one with the tear on the cover. Sometimes, before opening, she would run her fingers over the tiny boxes she once drew beside totals. She had checked many of them now. Espresso machine, lease, first payroll, but there were still blank squares. Scholarships for staff, free books for kids. A second location someday, maybe, if the first one kept its soul. She closed the notebook with a small smile and stepped back out to the floor. The bell above the door rang. It was a soft sound. A friendly sound. She didn't look up right away. She was mid-sentence with a woman at the counter who had just lost her job and was laughing through grief because the world hadn't left her another choice. Naomi touched the woman's hand and promised her the coffee was on the house today. "You keep coming," she said. "We'll keep a chair." The woman's eyes filled in a way that had nothing to do with steam. Naomi turned toward the entrance then, smoothing the front of her blazer with a habit that had never left her. And fate, tired, older, washed pale by its own stains, walked in. Charles Vance did not look like a headline. He looked like a man trying not to break in public. The sharp suit was still there, but it sat on him like a memory he couldn't afford to keep. His face was thinner, his eyes kept moving, as if each corner of the room might accuse him. The city had changed his name from master of the deal to the man who fell off a golden step. The papers said fraud like it was a brand burned into a hide. He stood a beat too long just inside the doorway, unsure if the room would take him in or push him out. Louise saw him first. A flash of old nights passed across his face, then faded. He turned away to top a cup. Raina's hands did not stop moving. The regulars kept talking, kept reading, kept being human in a place built for it. Only Naomi stepped forward. She could feel the past rise for a moment. The linen, the stain, the laugh that thought it owned the air. Then it settled like dust you let the light show you before you wipe it away. She reached the counter and met his eyes with an ease that took 2 years and a lifetime to earn. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. The bell had already stopped ringing. All that remained was the low music and a truth hanging between them like a line you don't cross unless you mean it. "You," he whispered, like a man touching a wall to see if it was real. His breath caught between the letters. Naomi smiled without showing her teeth. Calm, measured, a smile that knew its own value and didn't need someone else to set the price. "Welcome to Naomi's table," she said. Her voice was warm but even, the way you speak when you own every inch of what your voice has built. "Can I get you something?" He stared at her. The room seemed to tilt, not because she had risen, but because he had fallen. 1,000 nights of believing the world bent to him did not prepare him for a day when it would stand still and let him feel the shape of his own hands. He forced a swallow and glanced at the menu as if it could hide him. "Coffee," he said finally. The word was small in his mouth. "Black." Naomi nodded. "Of course." She turned to Raina. "1 black for the gentleman." Raina's eyes flicked to Naomi's, then to him, then back. She nodded and moved with the same grace she used for everyone. Naomi set a saucer on the counter. The act felt like a ceremony, a small one. A real one. Charles looked around as if trying to place the ghost of a chandelier that used to hang where there was only clean, quiet light. He saw the wall where the bar had been. He saw the spot where he had once spilled and snapped like the wine had disrespected him by being red. He shivered and tried to turn it into a chill. It stayed a shiver. When the cup arrived, Naomi set it in front of him with care. "Sugar?" she asked. He shook his head. She didn't press. She never did. She let people tell the truth they could manage. He lifted the cup, and his hands shook in a way that had nothing to do with heat. He took a sip and closed his eyes like the taste reached a part of him he hadn't checked on in a while. He opened them again and found her still there, not hovering, not walking away, just present. It made the room feel fair. "You remember me," he whispered, like the fear was that he had never been seen and the hope was that he had been seen only once. Naomi paused. She could have offered a quick mercy. She could have said, "It's fine," and let him float above his own weight. But that's not what this room was built for. Her eyes were gentle when they met his. Not soft enough to erase, just warm enough to hold. "I remember everything," she said. The words did not slam him. They set him down, carefully, almost kind. He looked at the table, at the steam, at his reflection in the cup's dark surface. For a moment he seemed to be listening to something only he could hear. A violin in another room. A young version of himself asking a question he never answered. He tried a smile. It weakened on the way to his mouth. "You did well," he said finally, nodding toward the space like it would nod back. "Better than well," he cleared his throat. "This place, it's yours." Naomi did not glance at the sign. She didn't need to. "It is," she said. She tilted her head toward the tables. "And it's theirs." The nurse with tired eyes, the teacher with papers, the woman at the counter who had just lost a job and found a chair. "We built it together." He nodded too fast, then slowed the nod, as if learning how to agree without owning the agreement. He reached for his wallet on instinct and then froze. News and shame had a way of emptying pockets and filling silence. His eyes flicked up with something like panic. Naomi saw it and did not stare. She gave him the gift she gave everyone, a way to keep dignity in the room. "Enjoy your coffee," she said, turning slightly to leave. "Not too quick, not too slow. Call me if you need anything." He watched her step away and felt the heavy shape of words he didn't know how to set down. He let one fall anyway, low and breaking. He stopped. He wasn't ready to say that one yet. Not here, not with eyes watching from inside his own chest. He lifted the cup again and drank like a man trying to borrow a steadier hand. The room hummed. The bell over the door rang for someone else. Naomi laughed softly near the pastry case at something Raina said. The sound was light, clean, earned. He turned to it, then away, like a moth practicing restraint. Outside, a cloud passed over the sun and then moved on. Light slid across the gold letters above the glass and made them brighter. Naomi's table. He read it once, then again, then let it land. The cup warmed his palms. He let it. And for a long, suspended moment, he didn't know if he was about to stand and leave while he still had some pride or call her name and finally ask for something he had never valued enough to pay for. A way back to being human. The check sat on the edge of the table like a secret waiting to be told. The ink was still fresh, the numbers clean and even, but Charles's hands trembled as he reached for it. The restaurant's soft music carried through the air like a gentle reminder that this wasn't the Copper Ivy anymore. There were no chandeliers hanging over him, no wine meant to flaunt wealth, just warmth. Honest, quiet warmth. Naomi's table breathed differently. It didn't whisper luxury, it whispered peace. And sitting there, with his napkin wrinkled and his pride half swallowed, Charles could feel that peace pressing against everything he used to be. He picked up the bill and blinked twice, pretending to read it even though the words blurred. The total wasn't high. It wasn't meant to humiliate. It was fair, but fairness was a currency he'd forgotten how to use. His fingers fumbled with his card, that familiar black rectangle that had opened every door, silenced every doubt, erased every wrong turn. It had always been his weapon, his proof that he was someone. But now, even the card looked smaller in his shaking hand. Naomi noticed. She stood a few feet away, not hovering, not waiting, just watching with the quiet understanding of someone who had already seen this moment long before it arrived. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, steady, and impossibly kind. "Don't worry," she said. "This one's on the house." Charles froze. The card slipped slightly from his grip before he caught it again. "What?" he asked, though he'd heard her clearly. His voice cracked around the single word, "Why?" Naomi's gaze didn't waver. Her tone carried no triumph, no mockery, no vengeance. Just grace, the kind that cuts deeper than cruelty ever could. "Because dignity doesn't need to prove itself," she said quietly. "You taught me that." Without even knowing. He stared at her. The words landed slow, one by one, like drops of rain breaking a drought. For a moment, he didn't understand. Then he did, and it hit him so hard he had to look away. Shame rose in his chest, not the kind that burns, but the kind that cleanses. It rolled through him like truth, steady and unrelenting. He nodded slowly, unable to speak, his eyes glistening under the low light. For the first time in his life, silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, heavy with everything that didn't need to be said. Naomi didn't move. She let the quiet do the work. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't cold. It was peace-earned peace. When he finally found his words, they came out as a whisper. "You built something beautiful," he said. Naomi smiled faintly, not out of pride but acknowledgement. "I just built what I deserved," she replied. Her tone was calm, almost melodic. It carried no bitterness. Only truth. Charles's eyes dropped to the coffee cup between them. The steam had thinned now, curling faintly into the air, a ghost of warmth. He could still remember the first time he saw her kneeling to wipe wine off his shoes while he laughed. Back then, she was invisible. Now, he was the one who couldn't meet her eyes. He stood slowly, tucking his card back into his jacket pocket as if realizing it couldn't buy him anything that mattered here. He adjusted his cufflink out of habit, though it was more for comfort than vanity now. He extended his hand, and Naomi hesitated just long enough to make the gesture real. Then she took it. His grip was firm, but not powerful, no longer the handshake of a man proving dominance, but of one asking forgiveness. Their hands lingered for a second longer than courtesy required. When they parted, Charles looked around the cafe once more. The walls were lined with photos, smiling faces, coffee cups, community events, life. Real life. There was no marble, no gold trim, no velvet curtains. Just the glow of light bouncing off real wood and real people. For a man who had once lived in the cold brilliance of wealth, this warmth felt almost holy. Naomi turned to the counter, thanking a customer on their way out. Charles watched her for a moment longer, seeing in her what he used to mistake for weakness. Now he understood it was strength. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't demand to be seen, but changes everything it touches. As he walked to the door, the city's nightlights flickered through the glass. The reflection caught him a tired man in an expensive suit that suddenly looked worn. He paused. Maybe, he thought, this was what humility looked like when it finally found its place. He pushed the door open and stepped into the drizzle. Rain was falling soft, steady, forgiving. It clung to his shoulders, slid down his cheeks, blurred the noise of the street. He didn't run for shelter. For once, he let it touch him. Each drop felt like something being washed away, layer by layer, lie by lie. Behind him, Naomi's table glowed in the distance like a beacon, gold against the gray. He turned once to look at it before disappearing into the blur of the city lights. Inside, Naomi stood at the window, watching him go. Her reflection floated beside his fading silhouette. For a moment, she didn't see a man who had hurt her. She saw a man learning. She saw what time and grace could do to even the hardest hearts. The rain outside mirrored the way her story had moved storm to calm, struggle to peace. Her staff gathered near the counter, quiet but proud. Luis caught her eye first, nodding with that same steady grin he'd worn since the beginning. Reina smiled from the espresso machine, her eyes bright with admiration. No one needed to say anything. They all knew, this wasn't about revenge. It never had been. Naomi turned back to the room, to the hum of laughter and the clink of cups, and exhaled slowly. This was reclamation, the return of something she'd never truly lost. Her worth. Because worth wasn't granted by the rich or measured in dollars. It was built, one act of grace at a time, one day of standing tall when others tried to make you kneel. She reached for a cloth, wiped the counter, and whispered, almost to herself, every storm ends somewhere. Outside, thunder rumbled far away, but inside, the air was clear. The rain kept falling, soft as forgiveness, steady as faith, and in that golden corner of the city, the story that had begun with cruelty ended in calm. No vengeance, no shouting, just dignity, quiet, unwavering, and complete. Because the truth about dignity is that it doesn't need to be loud to be heard. It doesn't need applause to be real. It just needs to stand. To endure. And sometimes, the people laughed at the loudest are the ones the world ends up applauding.